And he basically said the subscription fee that he has to pay for the software to the OEM is so high he can no longer fix my car.
Hello and welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show, our podcast that's dedicated to automotive technology and innovation. I'm your host, Mark Babin. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode. It's a great one. You're going to be glad that you did. Now on this show, we're going to be taking a deep look at the rapid evolution of technology within the automotive industry and the impact that that's having on operators, service providers, and much more within the space. Now, for this episode, I am very excited to bring on an expert in advancing automotive technology, the COO at Nodar, Brad Rosen. Brad and his team at Nodar are accelerating mass market autonomy through the development of 3D vision systems based on untethered wide baseline camera arrays and Nodar software. Brad, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It seems like a topic that you deal with daily. Really looking forward to your insights today. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a pretty exciting time to be in automotive.
Absolutely. We're seeing that more and more, and I can't wait to get into these topics and, like I said, get your insights. So on that, let's jump straight in. I want to start this discussion by addressing the exponential advancement in automotive technology that we've seen specifically over this last decade. It feels like every year we're seeing double the amount of solutions, double the amount of technology that's available to the consumer, to operators, to OEMs, and so on. So my question for you, as someone who's very active within this space of the industry and as an innovative leader, what's causing this pedal to the metal acceleration that we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think there's a lot of things that are driving the advancement in automotive. I mean, sort of at the core, there's always the safety thread, right? And so a lot of the things we work on, which are driver assistance systems and making the car safer and kind of more able to make decisions on its own in a safe way, are having a huge impact, right, on safety. And I was just in preparation for this looking around, and I found that ADAS systems have caused a 50% reduction in crashes in passenger vehicles since implementation, and a 40% reduction in rear end collisions with trucking. I mean, that's massive, especially with trucking, where those crashes are typically fatal. So there's a safety thread that's driving us forward. And also, you know, there's a convenience thread and sort of like competition between manufacturers to make more pleasurable, at least in the passenger space, passenger driving experiences. So we're seeing, you know, improvements in the console and the way you interact with your car, and also related to revenue, like revenue streams for the manufacturers. You know, an example of this would be Tesla offering, autopilot or FSD on subscription, right? We're going to see a lot of that. And so when you think about subscription revenue, and there's a lot of things we can talk about there, but fundamentally there's a technology stack that had to have been developed that allows over-the-air updates and the turning on of features within the car, like a centralized operating system. And, you know, there's quite a lot of technology behind that one concept. So yeah, I think safety, convenience, revenue, differentiation, these are all the drivers.
You bring up an interesting point, and just something to just dive into here. With how quickly this is advancing, is the public ready? Like, we talk about the subscription thing, and we spoke about it in the buildup, and all these advancing technologies that we're seeing. Is it happening at an equal rate that the customer is accepting it or expecting it? Or is the customer also demanding some of this evolution, or is the evolution creating the demand? How do you see that relationship?
It's interesting to contemplate, right? Because when we talk to, you know, average consumers, I think people are generally somewhat resistant to this type of change, where, at least on the ADAS side, the driver assistance side, the idea that the car is taking control of some functions. And there's no doubt at all that this is going to increase in scope, right? Whether you like it or not, your car is going to start to protect you more and more and more, to the point where, initially it'll be a choice, or it'll always be a choice, maybe. But, we're going now from sort of eyes off. I call it eyes off rather than kind of L2, L3. This idea that, my Volvo, I can press a button on the highway and it will stay in the lane. It will keep its distance from another car, and it will do it at night and in bad weather pretty well. But I do have to pay attention. That's eyes off. But we're going to go to hands off pretty quickly here. Mercedes launched their L3 platform, their hands off platform in Germany on certain roads in certain conditions. But so the scope is kind of narrow, but it will increase over time. And I think what is going to happen, just as we've seen with other technologies, even like television, which people were resistant to initially, right, is that people will slowly realize it's safe, and they'll start to adopt it more and more, and it will kind of there will be a continuum of adoption. But I think, in a decade, people will be reading books and not even thinking about it on the highway.
Yeah, just like we see in the movies.
It's happening, and there are reasons for it. It's not just cool. It's really going to save a lot of lives. The more cars that are smart in that way, the fewer accidents there will be. I feel pretty strongly about that.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to take as well. Geographically, do we see a difference in the types of automations and innovations and technology that we're seeing developed based on where in the world they are, say North America versus Europe, Asia? Is there a difference geographically?
Yeah, there is. And there's difference in philosophy, and there's a difference in risk profile, which is super fascinating. I mean, obviously we all point at Tesla, who's kind of out there in front and perhaps taking more risk than anybody else. And by the way, Tesla is, despite the crashes we see in the news and the fatalities, which are truly awful, Teslas are 10 times safer than any other vehicle on the road. So people kind of lose that concept. So, here in the US and with Tesla, there's a bit more risk being taken, and the rest of the industry, a lot of people are not so happy about that, because this is a very conservative industry that has people's lives in their hands. In Germany, people are much, much more conservative, and yet there's an incredible amount of forward-thinking research and development and now deployment happening, which kind of is really interesting. So in Germany, they're very cautious and meticulous, and the engineering is outstanding, but they also are ahead. Mercedes is the first to launch this L3 platform. They just got it approved in Nevada, so it's coming to the US. And again, L3 is hands off. It's like you can read a book on a highway in certain situations and not worry about your car. And then just to finish the thought, in Asia, specifically in China, I mean, China is very interesting because the government can make a decision to do something, and that is what happens. And so they have decided to embrace this idea of L4 autonomy, which is literally self-driving cars. And they're doing it mostly in the context of robotaxis. So there are huge projects that are becoming deployed, that are expanding in scope, where cars are driving themselves all over the place. And we do have that in San Francisco with Cruise and with Waymo, but at a much smaller scale. So, again, China can control a lot of things that we cannot, and therefore we're going to see fully self-driving cars over there deployed more widely, I think, than here.
Interesting thoughts. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense just based on the geographic. It's interesting that you mentioned the Mercedes and the German OEMs, because they're playing catch up a little bit. They've fallen behind some of the other models, and you look at Korea with Kia and Hyundai and them taking massive steps forward, and kind of Germans used to be the people who started everything. They were the ones who invented everything, the seatbelts and all these modern technologies, and they fell behind. So maybe that's why we're seeing them sort of push the envelope a bit more forward, despite Germany maybe being a more conservative place. But it's interesting to see that on the big global picture of how it's all playing out.
Yeah. And also, it's funny because when you talk to BMW, I mean, they're all about the driving experience. So, and I think Mercedes was traditionally that way. I think Mercedes has kind of embraced a forward-looking view more quickly than some of the other manufacturers. So there's some resistance within, the Lotuses and the BMWs and the Ferraris and Porsches to actually adopt these self-driving features. So I've kind of enjoyed watching that play out, because obviously what we're seeing is, at least with BMW, they are rapidly adopting these new technologies.
Yeah, despite it being against the driver being the center of the point. I couldn't imagine a self-driving Ferrari. I mean, that goes against everything that Ferrari stands for. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops. Yeah, absolutely. Great points. So I'd imagine right now we have obviously a lot of listeners who work in the industry in various forms: mechanics, technicians, operators, owners, people on the technical side, people on the strategic side. They must be wondering that with so many new solutions on the market, so many innovations hitting everywhere so fast, they must be wondering where they should be putting their focus. We can't all be billion-dollar OEMs that have teams dedicated to each individual piece of innovation. Of course, there's a lot of smaller teams out there that are wondering where they should focus. So what would you say to these listeners when they're looking to make the biggest bang for their buck on where should we put our time, where should we put our focus when we look at adopting new innovation?
I won't say that I'm an expert on things beyond suppliers and OEMs, because we spend a lot of time with those folks and thinking about their pain and their value propositions. But what I will say is that, like when I went to buy my car, I got no instruction on any of the technology inside of it. And so I literally had to spend hours and hours just like trying to figure it out. How do I use the app? How do I start it remotely? How do I turn on the autopilot? All of these things. And it did strike me as maybe just a gap in experience where like a dealership could have been more involved in my educational experience. So I think there's very complex stuff coming. Hopefully the OEMs and the suppliers package it up in ways that consumers, it's just seamless, like an Apple product would be, it's just seamless. But I think the operators need to have training on the technologies and really understand. I mean, that Volvo that I have it doesn't have the best interface, and it's not intuitive, unfortunately. I still love it. But so that's one thing that came to my mind, like just it is worth the investment in understanding the technology, because this is going to become a larger and a larger, increasingly large piece of the sale. And then related to that, this idea of subscription services is very, very important. It's important from a revenue standpoint. These are new lines of revenue, and I'm not sure how that affects the dealer, but I'm sure they're part of it. And then it affects the sale, the value proposition to the consumer. Like I read recently that BMW is starting to charge for heated seats, right? Like some amount of money per month for your seats to get warm, which we've all grown up with having that as just a checkbox feature, right? And so again, similarly, like I would invest in kind of understanding these things and how to sell these subscription services, like $10,000-$15,000 for FSD, like how do you even articulate that to the consumer?
That's interesting. So connecting those two, it brings up an interesting thought. So obviously, given your experience with Volvo, and we're not going to single them out, but just as an example that you went through, I think dealerships in general have lacked that customer engagement side. It's like, here's the car, here's the keys, okay, bye. Bring it back for service. Like that's kind of the end of the service.
Choose the checkbox and you're done.
Exactly. Is there then an opportunity for dealers to get more out of their customers, help to explain that future value prop by building a stronger relationship through engagement opportunities, having that like ongoing relationship with the customer?
Yeah. And actually that's such a good point and well said, because it's almost as if like in the past, the car was a commodity. The customer came in, chose the checkboxes, purchased it, and they're done. Maybe they come back for service. And now there's an opportunity to upsell them over a period of many years, as these features improve and expand, and there are more features available that work with that core piece of hardware that you purchased, right? And so there have to be regular touch points and an understanding of the consumer and a relationship that is built and maintained over a long period of time. So I would say the sales model really, it needs to change.
I think it needs to change. And to speak on from what you just said, I think dealerships maybe giving that personalized experience through data. I mean, everything is data, everything's strategically data-based at these models and everything. But if they're able to customize that experience for you, if they know that you have this system and they can, show you how to use it effectively, or when servicing comes, they're there for you. And there's that trust and relationship. So then when they bring in this subscription model, which like you said, is something we're starting to see. I mean, I can't imagine paying a monthly fee for heated seats. That's absurd. But if that's where the industry is going, right? And then you're gonna have to pay for heated steering wheel, and where does the line draw? But if there's a relationship with the brand and with the dealership on a personal level, then that value prop becomes a bit more easier to communicate, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if there's trust built into that. Like,
absolutely.
Like I trust the brand, whatever, BMW, and I know that they're going to package up things that are compelling for me, and if they've got my data, they know who I am. So they're recommending the sports package, which comes with the heated seats and the auto drive. Well, I'm probably going to trust that. And I'm more likely to buy something as a package than an individual like component, but that may just be me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the cornerstone of consumerism, right? It's trust just builds better sales. You trust anyone. It's what every salesperson will try to do, to establish trust, and then you can sell to them better. So it makes sense in the automotive space that the dealers can enhance that area of their operation. And maybe so that's where they should focus, is maybe not the technology itself, but delivering a better experience that allows that technology to be more transferable and understood at the end of the day.
Yeah. There's another component of this I was just thinking about, which is related to independent mechanics.
Okay.
I tried to bring my car into an independent mechanic the other day because it's out of warranty, and he basically said the subscription fee that he has to pay for the software to the OEM is so high he can no longer fix my car.
Oh my gosh.
And that was upsetting. And it seems to me, I mean, this is a kind of a macro issue with the industry maybe, but there are issues to attend to as things get so sophisticated that, whether the OEM wants to enable these millions of or tens of thousands of independent service providers, or whether over time everybody has to come back to the dealership. I mean, that doesn't sound right to me, but
it kills off part of the industry.
Right. So that seems like a pretty substantial issue.
Yeah, that's a great point. We raise something to discuss further, I think, in future shows. So coming back to adoption of technology, obviously, when you work with an OEM or a supplier, the process to go from conception to execution of a new solution, what are the realistic expectations that someone should expect in this? It's not overnight, obviously. It may not even be in a year. What should they expect in this process for when they want to bring something new on?
Yeah, and this is super fascinating for me because I've been in technology for a long time now, and I've done a lot of kind of B2B stuff and a lot of technology in different markets. I've been in this market for over 4 years now, and one of the unique things about automotive is just that duration of time it takes an innovation to actually get into the hands of a consumer. Traditionally, that's been 6 to 7 years. It's like a 6 to 7 year cycle. So we run around and we explain the value proposition and why our widget is better. And there's several years of kind of like testing and comparing. And then there's integration and more testing. And then there's working with then the suppliers who deal with production at scale and regulatory and compliance testing, and then eventually at the end of that it gets into a production model, right? And I think everyone on this call probably knows that, but it's been fascinating. I'm mostly a software guy, and I'm used to you write some code and you push it out and it's out there the next day or the next week. and you can test it and you can adjust it and whatever. So this has been quite different in that sense. So right now, the technologies you're seeing, like let's take Mobileye, Mobileye ADAS system in many cars. Well, that was being developed 8 or 9 years ago, and it has been in that pipeline for a long time. So our technologies, we target in specific level 3 and above. You're probably not going to see Nodar technology in a vehicle until 2026. And at that time, it probably will be on a truck, because the L4 trucking world seems to be moving along more quickly towards automation, and has a compressed timeline as compared with passenger vehicles. And then we expect to be in L3 production passenger vehicles in the 2027, 28 timeframe.
Wow. So the stuff we're talking about now is already in production. It's already in the move, but it's still years out. So the stuff that if you're going to start now, you need to be looking half a decade ahead. That's quite progressive, I guess. Yeah. That's a big challenge.
It is a huge challenge, and it requires a substantial amount of funding, and, we need to have design wins along the way and continue to prove the technology. And then we need to be looking at the next generation all the time, and then slotting those into the next version and the next version. And then we've got stuff that's targeting robo-taxis. And so that's a different timeline. And then there's ancillary markets like people moving, and then obviously other markets as well. Yep. So it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's a nice mind-bending exercise to think about. It's the first thing I can think of is like a movie or something like this. You look at like Avatar has been in production for a decade, right? And you're only seeing it now. So the technology you're seeing is the technology from a decade ago. So it's incredible to think of it that way. So what we're seeing today is actually the technology of the past coming to market, not the technology of today. Well, that's an interesting way to think of it. Cool. So to wrap things up, I'd love to take a look, obviously looking towards the future, the next decade, even like we're just kind of talking about here. What are your thoughts on the next 10 years as far as the evolution of new solutions and technologies? Are we going to continue to see this rapid expansion and rapid exponential growth in technology and solutions, or are we going to see things start to narrow down into their comfort zones and maybe what's working best, and it'll start to cool down a little bit, but in targeted areas? What do you expect?
Personally, and one of the things we haven't talked about is kind of compute and silicon and the advancement of these new dedicated processors, which are enabling things like AI, which I know you've talked about on previous shows, which are enabling more sophisticated neural networks to be running full time in the car and touching a lot of different components in the car. So I do not foresee any slowdown I don't know if ever, but I can certainly say I feel comfortable with 20 years of like solid innovation, right? And as long as the compute capacity continues to go up, and it's incredibly high right now, but it needs to be even higher, to be honest with you, if neural networks are to be kind of relied on like the human brain. So I think, despite market hiccups, right, we had the pandemic, we have the Ukraine war, sadly, and that has affected the world economy, and that is affecting the automotive market, and that is affecting the adoption of everything, right? So it does all cascade down. I do think all the OEMs will continue to lean in to the best they can, and they are. So we are affected a little bit less than other areas of the market, but so we've seen kind of an elongation of the adoption, the projections, and what I'm seeing now is like we won't see mainstream kind of hands-off driving, L3 driving until like 2033 is when L3 seems like it might exceed L2, right? Yeah. Which is what we've got today. So we've got a ways to go before like society embraces this stuff and we get the economies of scale of tens of millions of units, right? So if we're talking 2033 for, mainstream L3, we're talking 2040 for L4, when you could buy a vehicle that drives itself and you don't have to really pay attention within a metro area, right? So now, and those innovations, L3 will expand and expand. It'll be traffic. It'll be in traffic. It'll be on the highway. Eventually you go point to point, and like we call it the ODD, the design domain, it will expand slowly over time. And then we'll get into the L4 world, which is fully self-driving. And it's going to take a lot of innovation. L4 in particular is like, we've learned as an industry, it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
I mean, even these robotaxi systems like in San Francisco, where it's a constrained number of streets and they can map the whole area, it's still very, very, very complicated.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, it sounds like the ideas are there and the technology wants to go there. We need that core computing power, which just has to continue to develop. And then, like you said, there's no chance of that slowing down.
That's right. And by the way, we work with those silicon providers, right? Mm-hmm. We work hand in hand with them because the technology and the compute capacity need to elevate in lockstep.
Yeah, hand in hand, so that it comes together.
Yeah.
Perfect. A brilliant way to end. I think it leaves a lot of optimism on a lot of the people's minds, and, gives them something to look forward to technology wise, but also gives them a lot of insights on where they should be looking and how the relationship needs to change. I think that's kind of, technology is going to happen, but that relationship needs to be there in order for it to happen smoothly and efficiently. So fantastic points, Brad. Thank you so very much for your time today. Really, really appreciate the conversation. Before we wrap, any final thoughts?
No. I think you're right at the heart of a super exciting kind of market, and it's an incredible time to be part of it as vehicles start to kind of take control and humans take the back seat, as it were, and we kind of turn over control to the vehicle, and also liability. We didn't even touch on that, but liability for crashes will start to transition away from humans, which is another, we could spend another hour on that one.
Absolutely.
So it's really exciting. Yeah.
A lot of good times. Again, thank you so much, Brad. Really, really appreciate the time today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark.
Absolutely. And for everyone watching and listening, thank you so very much for joining us on this episode. Lots to digest, lots to take home. Hopefully you were taking notes. My notepad is full, and I can't wait to digest this and break it down. So again, thank you so very much, everyone, for joining me on this episode. A massive thanks to Brad Rosen from Nodar. And if you have any questions or comments about this episode, please drop them below and we'll get to them. Reach out to you and hopefully keep this conversation going. So again, everyone have a fantastic day wherever you are watching from, and we'll see you on the very next episode of the Auto Tech Show. Bye for now.